The roguelike genre is one that, even though I haven't really covered much of on this channel, is one that I particularly enjoy. Games like Slay the Spire, Hades, Vampire Survivors, there's something that's just so appealing about a game that you can pick up and play at any time, get a run in, and then set it down. And while not all roguelikes lack any sort of story, a lot of the time, the gameplay is definitely the focus. Play, die, upgrade, repeat. No two runs are the same, and the feeling of progressively getting stronger and stronger as you unlock better and better gear is addicting. Enough that most of the time, you're not actually just getting a single run-in. It's a formula that's been successfully applied to games across multiple genres, and today, we're checking out one that I've ignored for far too long. This is Skyrogue. Originally released into early access on Steam in 2015, but now fully released and available also on the Xbox and Switch. The game was created by Fractal Phase, a small 3-person dev team, one for art, one for music, and one for development. If you're looking at this and thinking, oh, it's Ace Combat, but an indie roguelike,
you were right.
And don't let its whopping install size of 258 megabytes fool you. This game not only packs a surprising amount of depth, but it's also deceptively difficult. Factor in the variety that comes from its procedural generation, an unlock system, and solid gameplay, and you've got a recipe for something that, if you're a fan of the flight action genre, is very hard to put down. Skyrogue is dominated by heavy saturation, polygons, and cel shading. Explosions are colorful and vibrant, aircraft are built out of triangles with lots of sharp edges, and the world itself is very geometrical, giving off almost arcade-like 1990s vibes with its heavy use of posterization. Color banding is everywhere, making it a pretty stark contrast from the more photorealistic style of the latest and greatest flight action games. But that's the point, and I personally am a huge fan of the aesthetic. As a happy side effect of this, the game will run on anything short of an actual potato. I didn't encounter a single stutter or slowdown in my playtime, and was pleasantly surprised that the game supports refresh rates higher than 60Hz, giving the game a very smooth feeling of gameplay if your monitor supports this, since you'll most likely be able to hit those higher refresh rates. To top it all off, accompanying you across these brightly colored skies is a surprisingly good soundtrack. Skyrogue offers two primary game modes, Play and Endless Mode. Play is the game's standard game mode, offering a set number of missions that takes place across 3 different types of islands that almost serve as biomes, offering different landscapes and color palettes. Endless Mode, from a pure gameplay perspective, is almost identical, but instead of the game concluding with a final boss after clearing the game's 3 islands, it just keeps going forever, getting progressively more challenging as you continue. We're going to be focusing more today on the standard game mode, but just know that Endless Mode does exist and is worth visiting after you complete a standard playthrough if you haven't quite had your fill. A standard run is comprised of 13 total missions that are, as previously mentioned, spread across 3 different types of islands. Like missions and objectives themselves, these landscapes are procedurally generated, so while all missions that take place on these have a similar vibe, they are technically unique. Objectives are pretty straightforward. Destroy a specific target, or in some cases, targets. But just focusing on these is not how you'll find success. The game is all about destroying as many enemies as possible to earn currency that can then be spent on upgrades, greatly increasing your effectiveness. Each specific type of target is worth a certain amount of reward. Basically, any sort of building, whether it's a hangar, radar dish, or oil rig, is where the money's at. Non-drone air targets do give something, but it's pretty minuscule compared to what you rake in for killing these higher priority ground targets. If you're curious, the game features an in-game Aeropedia where you can look at the specifics of these. Prior to each mission, you're able to spend your earned currency in the Aero Lab, where each type of weapon and airframe, which are known as arrows here, can be upgraded up to 2 times, increasing their effectiveness quite substantially. Setting up your aircraft is done via the Loadouts menu, which can also be accessed prior to every mission, allowing you freedom to customize as you see fit. There are a total of 20 aircraft to choose from, ranging from swing-wing interceptors to multi-role fighters, bombers, and even warbirds. Each is balanced with a set of stats: durability, speed, maneuverability, and acceleration, as well as payload and avionics, arguably the most important, because these dictate the weapons your aircraft will be able to equip in its 4 available slots. Every weapon in the game, from the standard micro-missiles to rockets, infrared missiles, and bombs, take up a certain amount of these, meaning that if you want to equip something like the longbow, which is practically a BVR missile, if you're not bringing an aircraft with a high avionics stat, meeting its requirement of 80 and then also having room to equip other weapons is going to be very difficult. The same goes for the more effective ground weapons, like bombs or heavy rockets. They take up a lot of payload, and while there are some aircraft in the game that clearly have better stat lines than others, like the later unlocked experimental planes, there's nothing that just lets you blindly throw on all the best equipment and call it a day. Even the Dracone, which is tagged as the ultimate multi-role fighter, sporting a payload and avionics stat of 160, which is pretty absurd, makes sacrifices to get here. The thing is a flying brick, so while yes, it will allow you to get a taste of both higher tier air-to-air and air-to-ground equipment simultaneously, you'll pay the price by not really being able to outrun anything. I love this take on balance, and it makes it so that, especially in the early to mid game, there isn't a single fighter that does it all. As far as actually unlocking aircraft and equipment, that's done via your tech level. As you get kills and complete missions, this level will gradually increase. When it does, the next time you die, you're rewarded with unlocks in the form of research points. 1 research point per level, which can then be subsequently spent to unlock whatever you choose, be it weapons or aircraft, with more of these becoming available as you reach higher tech levels. So at this point, you should have a basic idea of how the game works. Start a run, kill stuff, upgrade your equipment, die, unlock new equipment, rinse and repeat. But how does the game actually play? Well, if you've ever played a flight action game before, you'll have a pretty good understanding of the basics. Although it's worth noting that the flight model here is a bit more unforgiving than you may be used to, especially when it comes to stalling. This is something that's noticeable almost immediately. Yes, you can jam on the brakes to give yourself a pretty absurd turn radius, but if you're not careful, it's very easy to find yourself falling out of the sky. These limits vary though based on aircraft. Speaking of aircraft, the game does an excellent job at distinguishing between these. For me, it was most noticeable when going from a fixed wing to something with swing wings. The swing wings feel noticeably faster when their wings are swept in, and also noticeably less maneuverable. But man, you feel that absurd decrease in turn radius when the wings sweep out. Unlike Ace Combat, which tends to give you upwards of hundreds of missiles at your disposal, Skyrogue takes this concept and throws it out the window. Because why have an obscene missile count when you can instead have unlimited? This applies to every weapon you carry. Instead of a fixed number, everything is on a cooldown instead, with weapons that are carried in multiples regenerating one at a time until you're at max capacity. So on certain levels, particularly in the earlier stages when there isn't quite as much danger, it's worth scouring the map to take out as much as possible before returning to your carrier, which is how you end missions, FYI. Just approach the carrier and press A to land when prompted. And try not to crash into it. I'd be lying if at least one of my runs didn't end that way. Let's talk difficulty. So, funny enough, a lot of my earlier deaths were actually caused by collisions. This decreased as I got a better feel for the flight model, but it was something that I absolutely continued to fear as I continued to progress. All it takes is one little impact and your 45+ minute run is over. This was my second encounter with the game's final boss, and was the fight that really taught me that loadout wasn't everything. Notice I'm flying the Dracone that was mentioned earlier here. While yes, it technically has a better balanced overall loadout than the Raiju, which is what I first successfully cleared the game with, the lack of speed in this fight is killer since the boss has a sort of charge attack where it flies toward you. If you don't have the speed to separate, you can't get out of this range. At least not while still being able to turn around and attack without putting yourself in danger. But even when you remove collision mechanics, the game is still quite challenging. Once you get to later stages, there can be quite a lot of enemies thrown at you at once. From ground targets like SAMs to more traditional AA fire, flak, etc., and of course enemy aircraft, which can spawn as standard variants, veterans, or even aces. While you can technically avoid missiles, which are by far your greatest threat from these sources by turning or even dodging using the game's dodge mechanic, I found these to not be consistently reliable, and since enemies can fire special weapons at you too, which can really chunk away at your health bar, getting hit isn't really an option. You can take a few shots before you go down, but for the most part, unless you see an incoming missile and know that you're going to be able to dodge it, flares are going to be your answer. Though this is the one piece of equipment that you don't have an unlimited supply of. When leveled up to 3, you carry up to 16 of them. While you have them, you are fairly safe, unless an enemy fires at you from point blank range, because even when flared, missiles can still damage you if their trajectory lines up with where you're flying. But when these run out, the game can generate some truly butt-puckering moments.
Another happy landing.
This mostly occurs on the final island due to the much higher enemy count, and it's why my preferred strategy was to really focus on leveling up my loadout to max in the earlier stages, and then in the later stages, focusing on blitzing through the missions. This can be done fairly effectively, and it can make some of those missions on the final island an absolute breeze. But some objectives, like enemy dreadnoughts, do slow this down a bit, and can make things a bit more interesting than you may have anticipated. If you're into flight action games, I wholeheartedly recommend Skyrogue, especially if you can grab it on sale. It's a great little game that is surprisingly challenging, features a fun, addicting gameplay loop, has a very unique art style, and I don't have one so I can't say with 100% certainty, but I can imagine it's one that would be perfect on something like a Steam Deck or other handheld. Roguelikes in this genre are pretty few and far between, and if you're looking for something to scratch that itch while we all patiently wait for Delivery Must Complete, which looks very promising, I think this is perfect. Let me know your thoughts down below, and if you made it this far, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.